My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this fictional story begins on a quiet night when the world has finally grown still. Stay until the very end, because what you are about to hear is not a prediction about your life, nor is it a real message from a soulmate. It is a fictional story about love, forgiveness, personal growth, and the courage to speak honestly before silence becomes regret. Sometimes the words we most need to hear are the words someone finally finds the courage to imagine saying. Night had settled gently across the town. Streetlights reflected softly on rain-kissed roads, windows glowed with warm light, and the last sounds of the day slowly disappeared into peaceful silence. Most people had already gone to sleep, but one person remained awake, sitting beside a bedroom window with a notebook resting quietly in their lap. They had tried reading. They had tried listening to music. They had even tried convincing themselves that tomorrow would somehow erase the thoughts returning to their heart. Yet every attempt to distract themselves only brought one memory back again. It was not a memory of a perfect relationship or a perfect person. It was a memory of ordinary moments that had quietly become extraordinary over time. Shared laughter during difficult seasons. Encouraging words offered after disappointing days. Quiet conversations beneath evening skies. Gentle patience shown when life felt overwhelming. Those memories remained alive because they had changed something much deeper than circumstances. They had quietly changed the person carrying them. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because the emotional heart of this fictional story begins here. Finally, after many months of avoiding their own emotions, they opened the notebook and began writing a letter they never knew whether they would ever send. If these words ever reach you, I don't want them to create pressure or expectations. I only want them to carry honesty. There was a time when I believed silence would protect both of us. I thought hiding my fears would somehow prevent disappointment. Instead, silence only created distance where understanding could have grown. Looking back now, I realize the greatest things I lost were not moments themselves, but opportunities to speak honestly while there was still time. They paused, looking out toward the quiet stars. Then they continued. If life has taught me anything, it is this: kindness should never be delayed. Gratitude should never remain unspoken. Apologies should never wait until tomorrow. I don't know where your journey has taken you, and I cannot rewrite yesterday. But I have learned that every meaningful connection deserves honesty before fear has the final word. Tears quietly gathered in their eyes, not because they expected the letter to change everything, but because speaking truth finally brought peace they had not felt for a very long time. The following morning, they visited the elderly mentor who had guided many people through life's changing seasons. Without reading the letter aloud, they simply asked one question. How do you know when it's too late? The mentor smiled gently before answering. It's too late only when we stop allowing our hearts to grow. We cannot always repair every chapter, but we can always choose what kind of person writes the next one. Those words remained with them throughout the day. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance was not a promise that every relationship would be restored exactly as they hoped. It was the quiet invitation to become someone whose words reflected truth, whose actions reflected compassion, and whose heart no longer allowed fear to speak louder than love. That evening, they returned home, reopened the notebook, and wrote one final page. If I could tell you only one thing before tonight ends, it would not be about regret. It would be about gratitude. Thank you for every lesson that taught me patience. Thank you for every difficult conversation that revealed my weaknesses. Thank you for every ordinary moment that quietly showed me what genuine kindness looks like. I once believed I couldn't survive losing what mattered most. Now I understand something different. The greatest loss would have been allowing that experience to leave my heart unchanged. Because of everything I lived through, I now know how to love more honestly, forgive more quickly, and appreciate people while they are still beside me. My beloved child, listen carefully, because this fictional story now reveals one of its deepest truths. Sometimes the words, "I can't lose you twice," are not really about holding on to another person. Sometimes they express a deeper realization: I don't want to lose the courage to love truthfully again. I don't want fear to steal another opportunity to become the person I was meant to be. In this story, the greatest transformation was not found in changing someone else's heart. It was found in allowing their own heart to become more humble, more compassionate, more grateful, and more faithful than ever before. As midnight quietly passed, they gently closed the notebook and placed it beside the window. For the first time in many months, they fell asleep without carrying the heavy burden of unspoken words. Nothing outside had changed. The stars still shone above. The quiet streets remained unchanged. Yet inside, peace had finally replaced anxiety because honesty had replaced fear. My beloved child, don't skip these closing words, because the next chapter of this fictional journey will reveal what happens when an unexpected letter arrives carrying a message no one expected, a reminder that sometimes the greatest answers are not found by changing the past, but by becoming someone who lives every new day with truth, compassion, gratitude, and enduring hope. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because in this fictional story, the morning after that peaceful night begins with something so ordinary that almost everyone else would have overlooked it. Listen carefully, because life rarely changes through one dramatic moment alone. More often, it changes through quiet decisions that continue shaping the heart long after everyone else believes the story has ended. This is not a prediction about your life or anyone else's. It is a fictional story about healing, honesty, faith, and discovering that the greatest messages often arrive when people are finally ready to live differently. The first light of dawn slowly entered the room through the bedroom window, resting gently upon the closed notebook that had remained beside the bed throughout the night. The person opened their eyes and, for the first time in many months, noticed that the familiar weight upon their heart felt lighter. Nothing outside had changed. The same birds welcomed the morning. The same neighbors prepared for another ordinary day. The same responsibilities waited to be completed. Yet within them, something had become wonderfully different. They no longer woke asking, "What if yesterday had been different?" Instead, they quietly asked, "How can I make today meaningful?" After preparing a simple breakfast, they stepped outside carrying only the notebook and a peaceful smile. The cool morning breeze moved gently through the trees while sunlight slowly painted the quiet streets with warm golden light. Every familiar place now seemed filled with new meaning. The old cafe where encouraging conversations had once been shared. The small bridge where difficult decisions had been carefully considered. The peaceful park where children laughed without worrying about tomorrow. Everywhere they looked, they realized life had always been offering reminders that hope quietly continues growing even during seasons of uncertainty. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because the emotional heart of this fictional story begins here. As they walked through the community park, they noticed an elderly man sitting alone upon a weathered wooden bench feeding small birds. His gentle smile reflected years of quiet wisdom. Without fully knowing why, the person greeted him warmly and sat beside him for a while. After several peaceful minutes, the elderly man quietly spoke. "Do you know why birds sing every morning?" The person smiled and softly replied, "Because a new day has begun." The elderly man nodded gently. "Perhaps. But I like believing they sing because they do not carry yesterday into today's sunrise." Those simple words remained suspended in the quiet morning air. The elderly man continued. "Many people believe peace comes after every problem disappears. My experience has been different. Peace arrived when I stopped allowing old disappointments to decide whether I would keep choosing kindness today." Neither spoke for several moments. Watching the birds rise into the bright morning sky, the person quietly realized they had spent far too much of life carrying burdens that no longer belonged to the present. They could not rewrite yesterday, but they could decide what kind of heart they would carry into tomorrow. Later that afternoon, they returned home and opened the notebook once more. Instead of writing another letter filled with unanswered questions, they began writing promises to themselves. "I will never allow fear to silence gratitude. I will speak kindness while there is still time. I will forgive before bitterness becomes comfortable. I will value people more than pride. I will become someone whose presence brings peace rather than pressure." Each sentence felt less like a promise and more like the beginning of a completely new life. Meanwhile, elsewhere within this fictional story, another heart had also been quietly changing. They too had spent many evenings reflecting upon conversations left unfinished, opportunities missed through hesitation, and lessons learned through unexpected seasons. Yet instead of remaining trapped by regret, they also began choosing something different. They volunteered more often. They reconciled with family members after long misunderstandings. They reached out to old friends simply to express appreciation. Without knowing it, two lives were slowly becoming reflections of the very same lesson. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story now reveals one of its deepest truths. Sometimes what feels like losing someone twice is not about another person's absence. Sometimes it is the realization that we never want to lose the person we have become because of love, forgiveness, faith, and hope. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance was not directing every future event. It was quietly inviting them to protect the compassion they had discovered, to guard the humility they had gained, and to continue becoming someone who reflects truth through ordinary daily choices. As evening gently returned, they carried the notebook back to the familiar window where the story had quietly begun. This time, they did not write another letter. Instead, they simply looked toward the countless stars appearing overhead and whispered a peaceful prayer. "Thank you for teaching me that love is never wasted when it makes a heart kinder." Those few words brought more comfort than every answer they had once desperately searched for. My beloved child, don't skip these closing words, because the next chapter of this fictional journey will reveal how one unexpected meeting on an ordinary evening quietly confirms that while sincere love may begin with powerful emotions, its greatest strength is revealed through transformed character, faithful kindness, enduring patience, and the quiet courage to keep choosing hope every single day. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because in this fictional story, the quiet prayer whispered beneath the stars begins opening a door that neither heart expected to walk through. Listen carefully, because some of life's most meaningful moments never announce themselves with great excitement. They arrive disguised as ordinary evenings, simple conversations, and gentle reminders that every act of kindness carries a purpose beyond what we can immediately see. This is not a prediction about your life or anyone else's. It is a fictional story about hope, faith, healing, and discovering that courage often arrives one small decision at a time. Several peaceful evenings passed. The notebook remained on the windowsill, no longer filled with unanswered questions but with lessons gathered through ordinary days. Every morning began with gratitude instead of worry. Every evening ended with quiet reflection instead of restless fear. The person noticed that people around them also seemed different, not because the world itself had changed, but because their own eyes had begun noticing goodness that had always been there. They thanked the cashier who greeted every customer with a smile. They admired the school crossing guard patiently helping children across the road every afternoon. They quietly appreciated parents encouraging their children after difficult days instead of criticizing them for every mistake. These ordinary moments slowly became reminders that hope quietly survives wherever compassion continues living. One afternoon, while helping organize donated supplies for families recovering from a recent storm, they met a middle-aged carpenter repairing damaged furniture that others believed could never be used again. Curious, they asked why he spent so many hours restoring old pieces when buying new ones would be easier. The carpenter smiled gently while sanding the rough surface of an old wooden chair. Because broken things still remember what they were created to become. The person remained silent. The carpenter continued. People often look at cracks and assume the story has ended. I look at them and ask how much stronger they can become once they are carefully restored. Those simple words settled deeply into the heart. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because the emotional heart of this fictional story begins here. That evening, they carried those words back to the familiar hill where so many quiet conversations with their own heart had begun. Sitting beneath the old oak tree, they watched the final rays of sunlight disappear beyond the distant mountains. Closing their eyes, they quietly reflected on every chapter life had written so far. They remembered disappointments that had once seemed unbearable. They remembered friendships that had changed them. They remembered mistakes they wished they could erase. Yet for the first time, they no longer viewed those memories as evidence of failure. They saw them as evidence of growth. They softly whispered. Perhaps nothing was truly wasted. The breeze gently moved through the branches overhead as though the entire hillside had paused to listen. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance did not answer every question about tomorrow. Instead, it quietly reminded them that no season of sincere growth is ever meaningless. Every difficult chapter had strengthened compassion. Every delay had deepened patience. Every unanswered prayer had taught trust. Every act of forgiveness had made room for greater peace. They realized they no longer wanted life to simply become easier. They wanted to continue becoming wiser. Meanwhile, elsewhere within this fictional story, another heart had reached a similar realization. They too had spent many quiet evenings learning that genuine love cannot grow where fear continues making every decision. They had begun apologizing more quickly, expressing gratitude more freely, and valuing people more deeply than personal pride. Though neither knew exactly what tomorrow would bring, both were quietly becoming people capable of building relationships rooted in honesty rather than expectation. Days later, during a neighborhood gathering celebrating the completion of the community restoration project, families filled the streets with joyful conversations. Musicians played gentle melodies while children chased one another between colorful lanterns hanging from nearby trees. Volunteers shared meals prepared together, and every table carried stories of neighbors helping neighbors through difficult months. Looking around, the person quietly realized that every beautiful moment before them had been created by countless ordinary people faithfully choosing kindness without expecting recognition. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story now reveals one of its deepest truths. Sometimes people spend years praying for a miracle without realizing they themselves are slowly becoming part of one. A forgiving heart becomes someone's second chance. A patient conversation becomes someone's turning point. A generous act becomes someone else's reason to believe goodness still exists. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance was the gentle invitation to become that kind of person every single day. As another sunrise painted the horizon with brilliant shades of gold, rose, and blue, the person stood quietly watching the light spread across the valley below. Their notebook remained closed beneath one arm because they no longer felt the need to write every answer down. They had discovered something even more valuable. The most important message had already been written, not upon paper, but within the quiet transformation of their own heart. My beloved child, don't skip these closing words, because the final chapter of this fictional journey will reveal how two lives, quietly transformed by truth, humility, compassion, and faithful hope, finally meet again, not through dramatic destiny, but through the beautiful simplicity of becoming the kind of people who recognize genuine goodness when they see it, proving that the greatest gift love can offer is not perfection, but two hearts willing to keep growing together. My beloved child, don't skip these final words, because every chapter of this fictional story has been leading to this beautiful conclusion. Listen carefully, because what began with one sleepless night and an unwritten letter was never really about finding the perfect ending. It was about discovering the courage to live honestly, to forgive completely, and to love without allowing fear to become the loudest voice in the heart. This is not a prediction about your life or your future. It is a fictional story about hope, healing, faith, and the quiet miracles that begin when people choose truth over silence. Several weeks passed after the notebook had been closed beside the bedroom window. Life continued in its familiar rhythm. The sun still rose over the hills each morning, neighbors greeted one another with warm smiles, children laughed in the parks, and the seasons quietly continued their journey. Yet inside one heart, something extraordinary had happened. They no longer woke carrying the burden of unfinished conversations. They no longer replayed old regrets through sleepless nights. Instead, every sunrise became another opportunity to live according to the lessons they had learned. One peaceful afternoon, while helping organize old books inside the town library, the librarian quietly approached with a small envelope that had been discovered between the pages of a donated journal. There was no name written on the front. Only a single sentence appeared in careful handwriting. For the one who finally chose honesty over fear. Curious, they slowly unfolded the letter. Inside were simple words. You may never know how many lives your kindness has already changed. Sometimes the people who influence us most never realize the impact they leave behind. If your heart has learned to forgive, to speak honestly, and to remain compassionate after disappointment, then your greatest prayer has already begun to receive its answer, not because every circumstance changed, but because your heart did. They quietly lowered the letter and smiled. For the first time, they realized they no longer needed to know who had written it. The message itself was enough. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because this is the emotional heart of the entire fictional story. That evening, they walked once again to the familiar hill where so much of their journey had quietly begun. The old oak tree still stood faithfully beneath the evening sky. The same gentle breeze moved through its branches. The same stars slowly appeared above. Yet everything felt different because they were different. Looking across the peaceful valley, they softly whispered, "Thank you." Not because every prayer was answered exactly as I imagined, but because every unanswered season helped shape the person I have become. At that very same hour, somewhere else within this fictional story, another heart quietly offered a similar prayer of gratitude. Neither knew exactly where tomorrow would lead. Neither tried to force the future into their own plans. They simply chose to continue living with kindness, humility, patience, and hope. Without realizing it, both had reached the same beautiful destination, peace. As the months became years, people throughout the town quietly noticed something unusual. Whenever someone was discouraged, this person somehow knew how to encourage them. Whenever disagreements appeared, they patiently listened before speaking. Whenever someone needed forgiveness, they offered it generously. Their greatest influence was never loud. It quietly spread through ordinary conversations, faithful friendships, thoughtful service, and consistent compassion. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance was never about controlling another person's choices or guaranteeing a particular future. It was the gentle invitation to become someone whose life reflected honesty, gratitude, humility, faith, and enduring love. That transformation became far more valuable than any answer they had once believed they needed. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story now reveals its final truth. Sometimes we believe we are waiting for love to change our lives. Yet often, love has already begun changing us long before we recognize it. Every difficult season teaches patience. Every act of forgiveness creates freedom. Every truthful conversation strengthens trust. Every quiet prayer shapes character. Those invisible changes become the greatest blessings we carry into every future chapter. Years later, the notebook remained safely resting upon a bookshelf beside the window where the story had first begun. Inside its pages were no longer letters filled with fear or uncertainty. Instead, every page contained lessons, gratitude, prayers, and reminders that hope continues growing wherever kindness is faithfully practiced. My beloved child, remember these closing words as this fictional journey comes to its end. Never allow fear to silence words of kindness. Never postpone gratitude until tomorrow. Never believe that compassion goes unnoticed. Continue choosing honesty when silence feels easier, forgiveness when resentment feels stronger, and hope when the future cannot yet be fully seen. Those quiet decisions become the foundation of a beautiful life. And so, as one final sunrise filled the horizon with warm golden light, the person gently closed the notebook one last time and stepped outside with peaceful confidence. They no longer feared losing love twice, because they had discovered something even more enduring. Love had already accomplished its greatest work within them. It had transformed fear into courage, regret into gratitude, silence into wisdom, and uncertainty into quiet faith. The story ended not with dramatic promises or extraordinary signs, but with something far more lasting, a heart forever changed by truth, a life devoted to compassion, and a future walked one faithful step at a time. And as the morning light stretched across the earth, they smiled, knowing that the most beautiful chapters are never written by fear. They are written by people who choose kindness, honesty, hope, and love every single day.